We've been hearing about this law a little bit recently. That's basically says this. There's a law out there that says that if somebody sells their intellectual property, that at some point after 50, 60, 70, 80 years, I can't remember specifically, you or your estate can file to get that property back. Now, we saw that come into play before in the comic book genre. We've also talked about it recently. I don't know if you guys remember. This was up recently. We were talking about this with Predator, the estate of the guys who originally created Predator were suing Marvel or were suing Disney to get that back. Well, this is the same kind of case, except now Marvel is preemptively trying to sue the estates of Ditko, of Stan Lee, and of others so they can keep the Spider-Man, Iron Man, and other Avengers IP, because they could theoretically be in danger as early as 2023 of losing some of these characters. Now, this is what I'm going to read this from Screen Rant, just to give you guys an idea of what's going on here. Marvel is suing the heirs of some of the company's most notable creators in an attempt to retain the rights to characters like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and the Avengers. Over the past 2 decades, the comic company's biggest heroes have grown from comic book characters to pop cultural superstars, with the MCU becoming the dominant force in global film. However, despite Marvel's recent success, its characters are still subject to copyright law. Under copyright law, creators or their heirs or estates can file to reclaim the rights to characters or franchises they made after a certain period of time. Generally, a comic writer cedes the rights to their characters to the company they write for, but after a number of years, the law allows for them or their heirs to petition the publisher's rights to be terminated and the characters in question be returned to their original creators. A successful termination filing means the company losing the rights to the characters or story in question. Now, before we keep reading here, just something to keep in mind. So basically what this is that the estates of like Stan Lee, Ditko, and others, now Ditko's estate and heirs have already filed the petition to, in 2023, get Spider-Man back from Disney and from Marvel. So they've already filed that petition. So right now, what this story is basically about is that Marvel is preemptively trying to get that so that doesn't happen. Let's keep reading the story here because this is interesting. The waiting period is almost up for a number of major Marvel characters, and the company is taking legal action to try to retain the rights to Iron Man, Spider-Man, Hawkeye, Black Widow, Doctor Strange, and more. Per The Hollywood Reporter, Marvel has filed 5 different lawsuits against the heirs and estates of past creators, including Stan Lee, Gene Colan, Steve Ditko. The lawsuits claim that all the characters in question were created as work for hire, making their rights ineligible to return to the creators. If Marvel fails in its efforts, it could start losing some of the biggest characters in less than 2 years. Guys, this is significant. But let me tell you what I think is going to happen. Nothing is going to happen. There's no way these rights are leaving Marvel. There's absolutely no way. And I will tell you this. The more I thought about it after we started talking about it as it pertained to the Predator situation, the more I realized I hate this law. I honestly don't like a law that says, if you sell something to me in good faith, that 15 years from now, you just get to come back and say, I'm taking it back now. There's something so fundamentally wrong with that. There's something so fundamental, unless, of course, like, let's say, Kimberly, you sold me, I don't know, my green cup. Right? You sold me my green cup. You sold it to me for $15. I gave you $15. You gave me the cup. This cup is now mine. I don't like the idea that somewhere in some law book, there's a thing that says, you know what? After 10 years, Kimberly, you can just go back and take back that cup.
I love that cup.
Hell no. This is my cup. I paid for it. It's mine. It's mine. Now, listen, it's more nuanced than that. Rob, I think you'll agree. It is more nuanced than that when it comes to intellectual IP. It absolutely is. But listen, there was a similar situation like this, Rob, between DC and I believe it was the Batman. No, it was the Superman estate, the estate of the guys who created Superman. They remember just a couple years ago, there was the same kind of thing. And of course, DC won. I have no doubt Marvel's going to win this. I think they will probably prove that this is a work for hire and the rights should stay where they are. But I mean, it's still possible. It's theoretically possible that starting in 2023, characters like Spider-Man and Iron Man and Doctor Strange don't belong to Marvel anymore. Unlikely, but possible. Rob, you see this situation unfolding. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, if there's any company that can subvert copyright law, as evidenced by how they've been doing it for decades, it's Disney, especially with things like Mickey Mouse. I mean, all the way back to the 20s with Steamboat Willie and all of that. I think Disney's going to figure out how to circumvent this. There might be payouts involved. I mean, who knows? But it's, it's definitely a threat. But Disney will figure it out.
Kimberly, you hear this situation. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, first, I have questions.
Okay.
I have questions. So if the estate retains the rights, does it now, instead of Disney just having, or Marvel, the MCU, having the rights to do whatever they want with the story, does it now just become a licensing issue of, look, they're back in my hands. I've taken my green cup back. John, you can drink from it, but you must pay me a licensing fee.
I got to pay you 50 cents every time I want to use it. Okay. It could be. I mean, theoretically speaking, yes. And Rob, I think you'll agree. Theoretically speaking, yes. Theoretically, and this is such a big hypothetical, if, like, Ditko's estate was able to get Spider-Man back, they could then turn back to Marvel and say, okay, cool, Spider-Man's ours now, and you can keep using them, but you got to cut us a $50 million check every time you do, or something along those lines. Or they could turn to DC. Guys, I know I'm getting radically hypothetical here, but follow me here. Theoretically speaking, if Ditko's estate gets Spider-Man back, there is nothing stopping them from turning to Warner Brothers or going over to their buddies at Discovery, who now are going to own Warner Brothers, and say, how would you like to have a Batman Spider-Man movie?
Holy crap.
Again, as unlikely as it is, if they get Spider-Man back, it's theirs to do with as they please. It can be, we'll sell them off to the highest bidder. Hell, you could have a Fast and the Furious Spider-Man.
They will do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah. I mean, if Universal wants to get involved, it could be that. If Paramount wants to get involved, it could be Mission Impossible versus Spider-Man. I'm just saying, theoretically speaking, if Netflix want to get involved, they could do another season of Stranger Things and Spider-Man comes in and saves them. I mean, theoretically.
So it's just a matter of the money and how it's going to flow differently, because I think that, I mean, honestly, if they got it back, I feel like obviously you would just say, huge payday, come unto me. Why does this remind me of that scene in There Will Be Blood when Daniel Day-Lewis says, I drink your milkshake. And I'm like, somebody's drinking your milkshake right now. Y'all need to get your straw back.
And by the way, guys, Ivan in the live chat is asking a very good question, which is, okay, let's say, again, and all this is unlikely. Let's emphasize it again. All this is very unlikely. But if they get Spider-Man back away from Marvel, how does that affect Sony?
Good question.
My best understanding of how it would affect Sony is probably not at all. Because if Ditko gets Spider-Man back, they will still be under all the legal obligations that any existing licenses to Spider-Man. Like, Marvel may not be the owner anymore. Now you're the owner. But now you're responsible for the legal licenses it has right now. And Sony currently has a license.
See. Okay.
So they would have to honor that license up until whatever point they are allowed to get out of it and make the choice to get out of it, which sounds like that's coming up pretty soon anyway. And then they could do whatever they wanted with it. They could sell it completely to Sony. They could have, Blue Beetle and Spider-Man mash up.
I think Dominic Toretto needs a Spider-Man family.
Toretto with
we need another family member.
Rob, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let's say theoretically the estate does get Spider-Man back. I think the most likely scenario would be they would probably, like Kimberly, you were saying, they'd probably work out a licensing agreement with Marvel. But they could theoretically go anywhere. What could you see as maybe some of the possibilities of what they would do with Spider-Man after that?
I can see them going back to Sony.
just right straight up going back to Sony.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that ultimately in doing something like this, you would want to do what's best for your character.
Yes.
And I don't necessarily think that going to DC or rocking the boat or doing something, what you're doing is you're throwing chum in the water, and you've got to take, when the sharks come, you're going to have to deal with the results of that. And ultimately, I think that obviously, clearly, the best course of action would be to allow Spider-Man to remain at Marvel. And I think, look, you know what? There might be a very good case that the Ditko estate could get the rights back to Spider-Man, and then they would do what many people do and make that licensing agreement. I think that would probably be the best of both worlds for everyone involved. But I'm all for the idea that creators or their families could have the rights revert back to their own creations. The real question is, you know, how is that going to work in a work for hire agreement for Marvel, that kind of thing? Like, if you've created a character while you were working for a company, is that your character or is it the company's character? And that's always a very interesting sort of legal area. So I'd be curious to see where this goes at any rate, just because it's an interesting proposition from a content creator standpoint.
Yeah, my attitude has always been whoever paid for that thing is the one that should own it. I mean, that's just always kind of. But come on. How much money? If they announced Batman v Spider-Man or Batman and Spider-Man, detectives of, you know, the neighborhood.
We would be in an actual multiverse. We would be in a living multiverse.
How much money would that make? Like, are you telling me people would not flock to the theaters to see Batman, Spider-Man, detectives of the neighborhood? Come on. I am telling you that thing would make bank. Anyway, again, like I said, guys, this is all most likely going to amount to nothing. Marvel is most likely going to win this. And all things will stay. But it is fun to kind of imagine. Question is, guys, what do you think about it? Jump down into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts.